All right, welcome everyone. We're going to give it a minute or so to let everyone sign on, connect to audio. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Again, my name is Katie DeMeo. I'm here with AIM Consulting. I'm going to help the city facilitate this morning. But as we get started, what we want to do is we want to invite you to introduce yourself in the chat box. And so as I go through some of our meeting orientations this morning, we would love to hear what developers you're from, what agencies you're from, who's here in the room today. So if you want to introduce yourself right in the chat. I'm going to go through a couple of really basic Zoom instructions. As you see, you're here in the Zoom room. We do have everyone muted for right now. We're going to have a great question and answer session at the end of the presentation. But again, as I said, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Ask any questions throughout the presentations into the chat. We're going to have plenty of time again to go get through all of the questions. Just to let you know, this meeting is being recorded today. So we have a lot of people who are interested, but weren't able to make the call. So we're going to be posting both this video, the meeting summary, and a presentation to the website here within about a week or so. So anyone who has missed the meeting, please feel free to send them to the City of Dublin site and we'll get them a copy of this meeting. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Shannon to get the meeting started.
Hi, I'm Shannon Young. I'm the Environmental and Sustainability Manager for the City of Dublin. And today we'll be talking about the 2022 Building Code Update and a couple of REACH codes that will be proposed to City Council, which of course you all know, which is why you are here. So next slide, please. Today, I'll provide a brief overview of the city's Climate Action Plan 2030 and beyond to set the stage for why we're bringing the REACH codes to City Council. And then we'll turn it over to our consultant team that's helping develop the REACH codes. So we'll talk about the all-electric new construction REACH code and the electric vehicle charging station REACH code. And then we will also be talking about the next steps in this process. Next slide, please. So Climate Action Plan 2030 and beyond was adopted by City Council in September of 2020. There are two goals in CAP 2030 as it's known. The first goal is to align with SB 1382 to achieve a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions of 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. And the other is to set the city on the path to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045. There are 5 strategies in the CAP 2030 to help us achieve those goals. You can see them here, where we've got renewable and carbon-free electricity, building efficiency and electrification, sustainable mobility and land use, materials and waste management, and municipal leadership. There are 22 implementation measures total in to address those 5 strategies. Next slide. This slide shows what we're trying to achieve. Big picture, we have our 2015 greenhouse gas emissions inventory on the left. You can see transportation takes up a big chunk of the pie, and that's followed by building energy use. So gas and electricity, you can see, is the second biggest combined commercial and residential GHG emissions in Dublin. And then on the right-hand side, we have our targets and what we're trying to, the emissions gap that we're trying to achieve. So the green line shows in 2020, if we only implemented the known state requirements at that time, where we would be by 2045. And then the blue line is what we're trying to achieve. And of course, the red shaded area shows the emissions that we're trying to address or start to address with CAP 2030. Next slide. Next slide, please. So this is a selection of the 22 measures in CAP 2030 that the city is currently working on right now. In the 2 in blue, measure EE1, achieve all electric new building construction, and measure SM1, adopt an electric vehicle charging station ordinance. Those are the 2 measures that are being addressed by the REACH code, and those are what we'll be talking about today. Next slide. So as you know, the city of Dublin is working on updating our building code. In particular, our chief building official, Gregory Shreve, is working on those updates. And they will take effect January 1st, 2023. Of course, that building code update would happen regardless of whether or not we're bringing any REACH codes. It's the regular 3-year cycle for building code updates. The building codes that will be brought to City Council for consideration include all electric new construction with a feasibility waiver for commercial kitchens. There's also a general waiver for projects that are technically infeasible. You can't do the work, all electric. And then City Council will also be considering adopting Cal Green Tier 2 as mandatory for all product types in the REACH code. Next slide. So this is the team that will be talking to you now about the codes. Ryan Gardner from Rincon Consultants, he's going to be talking about the building electrification. He also helped, and Rincon helped us with our CAP 2030 update. And then we have Taylor Briglio and David Sneed from Wildan, who will be talking about the EV charger REACH codes. Next slide. And now I will hand it over to Ryan.
Thanks, Shannon. Yeah, so I think the first thing to remember when we're talking about the electric building REACH code is that this is only for new construction. So no renovations, no existing buildings. The other thing is to start to think about the 2022 building code changes. So there are already pretty significant updates for the base code for all electric buildings. The 2022 base California building code does allow for natural gas, but all electric ready is required for all building types. So that's panel capacity, 220 wiring to all the appliances. And then the prescriptive building, which is kind of the base that the code uses to model those energy needs, is all electric, has solar and batteries. So that's kind of what you're working against. And then depending on the climate zone you're in, there are requirements to either install a heat pump HVAC unit or a heat pump hot water heater. So that is the new kind of law of the land in California for building new construction. Dublin's REACH code just goes that next step further and requires that all new construction is all electric, so no natural gas plumbing, with one exemption for commercial kitchen end uses. So in that case, the building itself and the HVAC unit, hot water heater, all those things would still be all electric, but there would be an allowance to run natural gas to particular appliances that need natural gas. But those would also need to be all electric ready. So you'd still be wiring for those places. And there'll also be an infeasibility waiver available, as Shannon mentioned, that would allow you to apply for a technological infeasibility if you needed to install an end use that there just wasn't an electric alternative for. Some of these could be like large coffee roasting or brewery that just currently there aren't allowable technologies. So because of these changes to the code, all electric buildings are less expensive to build than mixed fuel buildings, because in the base code, you have to install electric either way. In this code, you don't have to install the natural gas line, saving you upfront costs. Next slide. So some of the key technologies, I already talked about heat pumps. This is going to be really critical to making cost-effective buildings. Heat pumps are at least 300%, sometimes more efficient, because they don't create heat. They just move it from one place to the other. You also don't have to install both an HVAC and an AC unit when you use a heat pump, because it can both heat and cool. So that's going to lower your equipment costs, further decreasing costs of construction. Stoves, we're really talking about induction stoves at this point. Slightly more expensive than a basic electric stove, but kind of in line with nice gas stoves. These use a magnetic field to heat the pan or the pot that you're cooking with. And they're really responsive. They work really well. More and more kind of folks are switching over to these. We're not talking about the old school resistance heating electric stoves. And then when we're talking about all electric buildings, especially when we have EVs, And battery backup, we're really talking about resilient buildings that can be powered off of multiple power sources, whether it's from the grid, your battery, or maybe even your EV, allowing your whole house to continue operating even if there is grid disruptions. Next slide. So some of the main benefits and reasons behind this code is, as Shannon mentioned, natural gas consumption in the city is a major driver of greenhouse gas emissions, and the reductions from building electrification are a key piece in meeting Dublin's climate action plan, and also allowing you to streamline CEQA. So this is another big benefit. By building all electric, you'll be consistent with that plan, and won't have to do a greenhouse gas analysis for the CEQA for your project. It's also cost effective. Like I said, we're lowering the upfront cost of construction because you're using that heat pump that can do both AC and heating, and you're also not installing that natural gas infrastructure when the code already requires you to install the electric either way. We're also going to see significant indoor air quality improvements because we're not going to be combusting natural gas in the home, which has been linked to health issues like asthma. And finally, aligning with that battery storage for resilience, allowing your whole home to work normally, even if there is grid disruption or something like that. Some of the questions I guess we might hear are, or we want to hear, is if there's any issues you might see when meeting these requirements, and if there's anything the city can do to help with implementation or to consider bringing this when we're bringing the code forward. Next slide.
Well, so this is one of those times when if anybody that's on the line has questions they want to ask now, we have time before we move on to the EV charger reach code.
Yeah, and you can put your questions in the chat, or you can raise your virtual hand, whichever is easier for you. But again, we just wanted to, like Shannon said, just pause for a second. I think we're good.
Oh, so one. For communities where LD is already installed, PG&E is telling us gas will need to be removed if not used. They're suggesting that this is driven by the city. This is a significant cost, and how is the city looking to ameliorate this?
I have not heard that PG&E hasn't reached out to us about this yet, so we'll have to get back to you on that. Yeah, we'll get back to this question because I have not heard that PG&E is telling communities that they have to remove the gas. So we will follow up on you with that.
Yeah, this is, again, specifically for new construction. So I think you're saying in a community where there's kind of a pre-planned community where there's already natural gas infrastructure installed. I don't know why you would remove that instead of just capping and leaving in place, which would probably save money, at least compared to removing it. Nothing in this code really affects that decision. If there is something like that, it seems to be just with a PG&E issue, not with the city or the code.
Actually, one follow-up question for the person who asked this question is, can you give an example of a community in which maybe you've been asked to remove existing infrastructure? Okay, so another follow-up question. When you say you looked at it in the boulevard, was PG&E asking you to remove it? Because I know that the boulevard, there's gas infrastructure out there already we're certainly not going to ask you to remove any gas infrastructure. Huh. You're told that slurry was not an option. Gregory, I don't know, do you want to speak to this at all? I mean, we're allowing gas for the boulevard. I don't know if Gregory,
We have some neighborhoods that are not in master plan check. And if they submit after the first of the year, they would be subject to these new regulations. I have not heard from PG&E. Nobody's asked me about it. I don't know if there's anything going on with Public Works. I have heard from developers that on projects that they looked at being all electric just on their own under the current code. PG&E was telling them since they had gas in the ground, they would have to remove it. But I have had no discussion with PG&E on the subject. To me, you just cap it. If I find a spot before it goes into that neighborhood, cap it, and to me, we would be done. But PG&E is their own entity. I have no idea what they're going to do.
okay, we'll look into your question. It could be a Public Works requirement, particularly regarding the slurry, but we will get back to you on that.
All right, should we move on?
Yes.
All right, hello everyone. My name is David, and I'll be taking you through the first part of the EV charging code update. So I wanted to begin with some definitions. There are 3 levels of charge readiness that you're going to see in the code. First level is EV capable, which requires the electrical panel to have adequate load capacity and conduit installed near the parking stall to support a future EV charger. EV ready spaces take this to the next step by additionally requiring the breakers, the wiring, and a receptacle such as a dryer outlet to be installed. And finally, there are your actual EV charging stations, which require all of the necessary infrastructure, including an actual EV charger. So on this next slide, we have some more relevant definitions that you're going to see in the code, beginning with electric vehicle supply equipment, which is sort of a catch-all term that relates to any and all of the infrastructure and equipment needed to charge the EV. So for some actual levels of charging that will come up in the new code, we start with your basic level 2 charger, which requires a 208, 240 volt, and 40 amp circuit. This is the most common form of charger that you're going to be needing to install. And we have low power level 2 chargers, which have that same 208, 240 volt, but they have only a 20 amp circuit rather than a 40. Direct current fast chargers, they come up for the commercial. They are non-res properties only right now for the requirements and can replace up to 5 EV charging stations. They have 480 volt 3-phase power and often a higher amp circuit than the other levels. Finally, automated load management systems intelligently manage power across multiple stations, enabling existing site electrical infrastructure to meet the growing demand for charging. And the conditions under which they can be used vary between residential and commercial. Now for what's actually in the code, beginning with multifamily residential. This also extends to hotels and motels. The code has changed from 2019 to go from 20% EV capable to 40% EV ready for properties with less than 20 units. You can see that in the first table here. For properties with 20 or more units, that same 40% EV ready is required, as well as an additional 15% of stalls having actual EV charging stations. This means that there's a total of 55% of stalls that are affected in new construction. EV ready percentages are for a minimum of low power level 2 chargers. They could also be level 2 ready, while EV charging stations require level 2 chargers. Finally, automated load management systems are permitted when EV charging stations are installed to past the minimum requirement, but they must provide a minimum of 3.3 kilowatt output per port. Now moving on to commercial codes. The 2022 codes have increased its EV capable percentage from 20 to 45%, and also requires that 15% of stalls be EV charging stations. These percentages, unlike before, are cumulative, and to make this a little bit clearer, we've got a table here that shows you an example 100 space lot and how many stalls are going to be affected and to what degree. You can see there's 45 total stalls that are affected. For commercial properties, direct current fast chargers can be installed to substitute up to 5 EV charging stations, but the code did stipulate that there must be always at least one EV charging station. Automated load management systems can be installed with that same requirement for a minimum output of 3.3 kilowatt per port. And now I'm going to hand it off to Taylor, who's going to talk more about the commercial codes, the single family, and the existing building codes.
So next slide. All right, thank you, David. So there are some additional codes for commercial buildings, specifically for warehouses, grocery stores, and retail stores. This is in the base code. There are no additional voluntary requirements under tier 2, but we did want to spend a little bit of time just to go over these. The intent for these specific building types is to provide electrical capacity to eventually support future medium and heavy duty electric vehicles. The size of the transformer will be based, it's a function of either the building size or the number of off-street loading spaces. So as part of new construction for these facility types, you do need to add the transformers of minimum capacity. The plans need to show where conduit could then be ran and where the EV charging station would go, but the code does not have a requirement to include the conduit at this time. And again, yeah, the intent is for these to serve future DC fast charger stations. Next slide. For single family new construction, we see the same pattern of the 2019 requirement moving from EV capable spaces to EV ready spaces in the 2022 requirements. So basically, we're just adding the breakers and the wiring and an outlet. There are also some trigger requirements for existing buildings as part of the new codes, specifically for multifamily family facilities. And the trigger is if you are adding new parking stalls to the facility, or you're altering the lighting or electrical systems such that you need to pull an electrical permit, 10% of those altered spots need to be EV capable, as again at a level 2 chargers. This does not apply to any commercial facilities. And so we've got the same questions we like to ask the group that we did for the building electrification, and want to know what issues you all might see in terms of meeting those requirements, and then how can the city best support with meeting them.
And again, feel free to use the chat box, or you can raise your hand or your virtual hand. And for those of you who don't know, the virtual hand is found in the reactions button in the toolbar of your Zoom meeting. Okay.
Okay.
We'll hand it back to Shannon to close us out. Oh. Good. EV chargers take up physical distance on a site plan that may not fit on a site that was previously approved to be EV ready only. And that's a good a good point. I know that there's a variety of different charging stations out there with different footprints, depending on where that conduit is run. There may be different options. Wall mounted may take up less floor space versus something that's maybe pedestal mounted, is depending on where those stalls are going. And in some cases, the level 2 outlet may be a viable option that has a very small footprint. And that's kind of going back to the pictures that we had up earlier. It's where the car plugs into the outlet versus the plug going into the vehicle. So there may be some options that are maybe less than ideal, but potentially still viable. I would also take this as a lesson learned as you're developing new sites to account for potential footprints of charging stations so that this issue doesn't come up again.
That's great. What's the idea behind the EV ready on the current code is that it is set up to be able to do chargers at some point down the line. So we should be planning for that area. Yeah, you're already running the conduit into it, so you need to prepare for something to actually be installed later on.
All right, it looks also we have another question in there. How's the city interpreting the code sections between the single family townhouses with private garages and R2 occupancy condos with private garages? Do the condos fall under the 0.1 section or 0.2 section?
If the unit has a private garage, then it would fall under the single family requirement. If it's general parking, like a standard apartment complex, then you would fall under section 2, where you have to just basically treat it as a parking lot. Does that answer your question? Yes, it's not based on occupancy, it's based on the garages. So using Gramercy as an example, they have both. So we would look at both. Look at the garages meeting the requirement for a single family, and then the general parking, the guest parking, meeting the requirements for a parking lot. Sorry, my sound isn't clear. It's the best I've got at the moment. I haven't figured out what's wrong.
All right, looks like that answered that question.
Hey, is that better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Much better.
Okay. I think I figured out what was wrong. I went to a different mic.
All right, if there's any other questions, again, feel free to raise your virtual hand, put them in the chat box. We have plenty of time to answer.
Before we
Okay.
get to this slide, what I want to remind all of the developers is that you go by the code that you apply for. So if you get your applications in this year, prior to December 29th at 4 o'clock when we close, you would be under these codes, provided you didn't let your permit applications expire. You'd be under the current code. If we receive them after we close for the year, then you'd be looking at next year's codes and have to do the update to your plans. Next step, Shannon.
Okay, so next steps, Gregory will be bringing to City Council an item to set the public hearing on the proposed reach codes on November 1st. And then 2 weeks later, the public hearing will be held at the City Council meeting. And then we will have the new building code effective January 1st, 2023, as Gregory just mentioned. So we also want to let people know and remind you that anyone can attend the City Council meetings. They are still hybrid. I believe they'll probably still remain hybrid for at least the November 1st and probably November 15th meeting. So you can either attend in person or via Zoom, and the meetings start at 7 p.m. The Zoom information can be found online, and if you just, the easier way to do it instead of following this URL is, it's very easy. On City of Dublin webpage, they have a tab specifically for agendas, and that has all of the Zoom information there. So those are the next steps, and I believe that that is the end of our presentation. So if anybody, oh, contact information. So my information, if you have any general questions on the reach codes, or Gregory, as mentioned, he's the one that's bringing the codes. You can reach out to me and I can filter questions either to Gregory or to our reach code team or myself. So that is what we have. And if anybody else has any questions regarding anything in the presentation, you know, electrification or the EV charger, we still do have time. Yeah, 30 more minutes. So if anybody has any additional questions.
And I did put the link to the website in the chat box. So if anyone hasn't visited that, feel free to visit there. And like Shannon said, we'll stay on here for a few minutes in case there's any other questions. But again, I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. Super helpful. Thanks, Francisco. Appreciate the claps. Thank you, Leah, for joining. Appreciate it. All right, there is a question that came in. If we submit all applications by the end of the year deadline, how long do we have before we need to pull the permit?
That is a Gregory question. I see that Gregory is not in the, he must have had to step away for a minute. So if you can.
No, it looks like it was from Mandy.
Yeah.
It's for Gregory.
Sorry.
Sorry, it's a Gregory question.
Yeah.
Got it.
Oh, here's Gregory. We can ask him. Gregory, there's a question regarding if people.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. If people pull permits or submit an application before the end of the year, how long do they have to pull?
Permit applications are valid for 6 months. And from the time I send comments. So basically they'll get a letter just like we have in years past that, hey, give me your applications. I know there'll be some blank spaces on the single families, but the multifamilies, we already know what building's going where. So you'll give us the applications in December. They'll be good for 6 months. At the end of the 6 months, we will have to have done something else so we can get you another 6 months. So basically, as long as you don't let them expire, it'll be good for a year. So anything you apply for this year, next year, you can have that for 1 year. Keep in mind also that your permits are valid for 2 years. So from the time you take the permit out, you got 2 years to build it. And if you've started construction, you are eligible for an extension past the 2 years. If you have not started construction, sorry, you're out of luck.
Thank you, Gregory. And again, with that, that is the end of the presentation. So if there's, again, any other questions, we'll be on here for just a few more minutes. But again, we did record this presentation. We'll get it up onto the website for anyone who has missed it or anyone that you need to share it with. All right, and again, thank you all again. We'll close down this meeting. And again, we just appreciate you all coming here today.
Thank you.